Hi, I'm Lex. I'm originally from Atlanta, but I've been in Berlin for the last 3 years. And I guess I'll start with a story as one does. Um, I originally wanted to get into sex and sexuality because I wanted to help people with dysfunction. So when I very first started back thinking about this back in 2011, 2012, I wanted to make products for people with erectile dysfunction, with lubrication issues. And I quickly realized that I had no skills for that. Like I was a Chinese major in college. So I was like, okay, well, how am I going to build products? And this was way before like I realized you could just like find someone to realize your ideas. So I got disheartened, wandered around the world, moved to China, moved to Asia. And during that process, I started exploring sexuality from the product side, going to tech fairs, going to trade shows. And I started seeing that people were designing products without using data. They were basically building products based on their bodies and then assuming that that was going to be magically replicable for everyone else in the world, which is like, yeah, fail, total fail. And so you get all these clone products that look exactly the same. And that's how I got into user research, but that's specifically how I launched Modality Group, was to fill that void in the sexuality space for data-driven product development. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to go through basically, well, what is sex tech? And some of you had some really awesome answers in the previous question. Then we're going to go through why we need user research in sex tech, some of the challenges that I've faced and some other people in the industry have faced, as well as some research methods and tips and tricks. Then we'll end by talking about the privacy concerns with user research in this very taboo space. So what is sex tech? So a lot of people talk about orgasms. A lot of people talked about, anything with technology and body. The way I describe it is an umbrella term for products and services that are enabled by tech or deep tech in and of themselves that impact sensuality or sexuality. Now, the reason I spell them both out, is because, as I mentioned before, a lot of times people are too genital focused and too orgasm focused. And when we think about sexuality and sensuality, it's more than just that. We're talking about actual intimacy. We're talking about bodies. We're talking about connection and human attraction. But we're also talking about health and wellness, whether that be femtech, men's health, and the like. Now, realistically, this term was created to give the space legitimacy. We had heard about fintech, med tech, and adding tech to something apparently makes it legit. So I believe it was Cindy Gallup, who is the founder of Make Love Not Porn, who said, okay, if we want to get money for our inventions, we need to make ourselves legit. Even though we know we're doing legit businesses, having this kind of technological field gives us a little bit of cred. So in a way, it's a made up word, but whatever, we're rolling with it. So some products might look like this. So we have a range of things for you guys to browse. On the left, we have the Satisfier Pro, which is a clitoral stimulation toy. Very simple technology, battery operated. Then on the far right, you have what's called a Sibian, which is a riding toy for people with both vaginas. And then in the very middle, we have the Handy, which is intended for penises, which is a masturbation kind of tool. And this one is actually deep tech. It's got AI, it's got the software updates. It's very intense. But then we have things that are a lot more simple. Cheeks is a Berlin-based pornography company that does ethical and feminist pornography. And Amorous, this little flame here, is a sexting app that helps people safely sex with their flames. So as you can see, it really runs the gamut and it solves several different needs for different kinds of bodies, all over the world. Now, why do we even care about user research in this space, right? Like it's sex, you figure it out. Well, historically, sex toys have been designed by men, specifically cis men, for both cis men and cis women. And when I say cis, I mean people who were born as men and identify as men, so their gender and their bodies match up. And so, okay, so take these time frames with a grain of salt. They're rough estimates. So like in the beginning, there were men designing products for everyone. And that was fine. The images were a bit more seedy. So you think more these jelly toys with the porn stars on the front doing the things. No shade, just how it was, a little bit back alley kind of vibes. And then you go in and you feel a little uncomfortable and maybe you don't buy anything. You feel like you don't want to touch anything. You know, it's a little bit sketch. And so then as we kind of shifted away from that, more women started entering the space. And we started seeing sanitization of the industry. Everything became blue or purple or I don't know, octopus shaped and very like pretty. And so this is where we kind of shift to where we loosely have been for a while. This is where you get the MRLEs, you get the Dame products, these kind of companies that are made as health and wellness and including pleasure in that spectrum. What that leaves out and has left out is actually women of color. It's left out non-binary people. It's left out trans folks. It's left out a whole host of people with disabilities. It's met, you know, these are not products designed for everyone. It's still the same problem we have in phase one, but a little more inclusive. Now, fast forward to now, we're starting to see that shift happen to have everyone else, which is like, hooray. We're finally getting to a place where the nuance of the industry is being acknowledged and the nuance of people is being acknowledged. And this is a really important place. Now, what I said in the very beginning is that people are building these products based on their own bodies. Well, if you're doing that, you're not exploring what's possible. You're not exploring what other bodies might need. You're not exploring the diversity in genitalia. You're not exploring the diversity in dexterity. You're not exploring any kind of gender misalignment that happens. And we're taboo still. So if you don't ask, they won't tell you. So picture this, all right? You buy a new computer, oh no, let's say you buy a new car. You buy a new car, you go out, you drive it, it don't drive so well. You say, oh, the car is busted. You return the car, cool. Let's imagine you buy a new butt plug. If it doesn't work for you, you think your body is broken. You don't return it, you keep it in the drawer, you don't use it again. And so, you know, it becomes about you and not about the design. And that's a big problem. So people keep designing things the same way, they keep being spread word of mouth, but they're not working for people. And you're not asking them what they actually wanted. You're not asking them what they needed. You're not asking them what their pain, like physical pain points might be, because we're talking about sex, there could be pain involved, you know? And so when you don't ask people what they need and what they want, you mass produce products that no one will buy. And you can isolate people into one, you know, kind of shame bucket. And we don't want to do that. So user research in sex tech and in other taboo spaces is about eliminating shame from people's, you know, minds and bodies. Now, as you can imagine, that comes with its own set of challenges. And I've highlighted 3 because these are the most common ones that I encounter. Discomfort, like people don't want to talk about their sex lives, like not really. And when they do, they want to kind of embellish or downplay. So either you're having all the sex in the world with all of the beautiful people, or you're having, you know, oh, I'm modest, I don't have sex, tee hee hee, not that kind of sex anyway. So, you know, you get this incentive for people to lie a little bit. So you're trying to figure out, how can I speak to people in a way that makes them warm and comfortable as a means to getting the truth? And if so, like what kind of proxies can we find to get the reality of it and make them, you know, really understand what they're talking about. Point challenge 2, dispersion. People are everywhere. So depending on who you're looking for, they may not be right in your backyard. So let's say, well, let's say, I was doing a research project on trans people, specifically, well, it was trans people, non-binary people, and queer women. And we were researching for an app-controlled strap-on product. And they were everywhere. People are all over the map. You don't have large concentrations of any of these populations necessarily. And so you have to figure out, how can you access them? And if you do access them, how do you get them, again, with the trust? Because so often when people are trying to access these populations, they're trying to exploit them, right? You think about rainbow washing, June's around the corner, and you will see all of the corporate pride flags come out, in solidarity, and they really don't care. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of a digression. But point is, that people are spread out everywhere, and trying to get them in a one place so you could talk to them and get their point of view is really challenging. And then also demographics. And what I mean specifically is, in the previous example, I talked about trans folks. They have more of an incentive to talk to me because I'm going to try to actually give them a solution to a pain point. And once you find them, whether it be in groups and you get their trust and you are trustworthy, they will talk to you. They'll tell you all of the pain points, all of the needs. Straight people, on the other hand, they are super satisfied. Anybody kind of, they don't want to talk to me. And so depending on your demographics, it makes it really hard to get answers fast, to get the sample sizes you need for surveys, and just honestly for people to actually care. And so we have to think about how we approach different demographics differently based on what we need from them. Cool. So some of the ways we do this, I believe in threes, so we'll go on threes again. We prioritize empathy. It's really important to, and I guess this is important in all user research, right? For you to be really aware of what the people you're talking to, and particularly, or potentially surveying or, testing, excuse me, you need to be concerned about how they interpret your questions. You need to be concerned with how you order questions and all that. That's true across the board every time you do user research. In the taboo spaces, it can actually make people angry if you mess up. You could actually hurt someone's feelings. You can make someone feel alienated, and you can also make them feel outside of their body. And so for us, empathy is paramount. So we tend to prioritize deep interviews because it's the best way for us to get true information and make people feel comfortable. I was recently doing a project about for a blowjob trainer. Don't ask me what that is. I won't tell you. But the problem that we ran into is, some people we talked to were super sex positive, would talk about oral sex all day. Others were really conservative, and you needed to almost hint at what you were talking about. And in mainstream research, hinting at something is not science, right? You need to be explicit, because you're like, there could be misinterpretation. Best practice in sex research is a little bit less that. I've talked to some sexologists down in Melbourne who actually say embrace the bias. And I'm like, I don't know how far I believe in that, because it's maybe a bit too far, but a little bit of bias and a little bit of sugarcoating goes a long way. And so we use deep interviews because we think that it's the best way to modulate for your different demographics. And then from those deep interviews, we create two types of surveys. So we do two types of surveys because one is a guided survey, which is almost like an interview. and the other is a solo survey like you've seen 1,000 times. So for the guided interviews, it would be basically, or the guided survey, it would be basically watching someone take a survey in front of you. This way they can ask questions with you right there. You can have the nuance, you can anticipate any discomfort as they're going through the process, but they also can be quiet and be a little bit more with themselves if they need to be. So it kind of gives the best of both worlds of a little bit of privacy, but also, you know, clarification. And then for our solo surveys, this is actually where it gets a bit complicated. I'm going to pause for a second and then rewind. Okay. So with our solo surveys, what we always do first, like I said, is deep interviews. We use the deep interviews then to craft our surveys. Now, one of the problems we found with the solo surveys is it really depends on the culture you're interviewing. We did a survey in Latin America, and it was in Latin America and India. The same survey, one translated into Spanish, one not. In both cases, they were like, why are you asking me about the sex stuff first? And I was like, sorry, I don't understand. They wanted to answer the demographic questions at the bottom before answering the sex questions. And best practice for surveys is usually to leave the most sensitive questions as like kind of almost optional in the bottom of the survey. In this case, that wouldn't have worked. We did it anyway, just because that, you know, this is where we were. But there's lots of potential to rethink how we do surveys for taboo spaces. Maybe you have to do more breadcrumbs throughout the survey than in a normal survey. Maybe you kind of like sprinkle a harmless question in with a kind of risque question. But solo surveys, I think right now are a work in progress, but that's how we have to do it, just because we need the sample sizes. But when you think about doing solo surveys for taboo subjects, don't be afraid to get creative. We're working in a space that is new, and so there's a lot of room for experimentation. And then the last tool we use, especially for product, like the kind of more digital products, as well as for physical products sometimes, we use a mix of A/B testing and image heat maps. So I think most of you probably are familiar with A/B testing, like showing two different screens with different, like slightly tweaked messages to see which one resonates. We do that too. And it really helps us understand what language is off-putting and what language is okay. But the coolest thing we do is these image heat maps. It allows us to identify on physical products what is going to be the most off-putting, or what people like and what people don't like. So imagine this: you have an image of a vibrator, for example. Oh no, let's say like a strap-on, because this is what we did actually with the strap-on project. We had an image of the strap-on, we had an image of the app, we had an image of how it would look, the mock-ups, and we said, okay, which is the part you like the most? And people put, you know, all the little like heat bubbles on the shorts, or they liked the actual phallus. And so which did you hate? And everyone zoomed in on the balls, because this particular design had balls, and the balls were actually where the technology sat. So she couldn't actually take it out because it had to be there for her to have the tech, for it to be app controlled and to inflate and deflate, you know, on its own. And so we had to figure out, like, okay, how do you solve this problem? But by using these heat maps, it was like conclusive, like you can't have this here. And this is a good way for people to like not have to have their names on things and still be able to give their opinions. Cool. So one of the things that we worry about the most is privacy. It's a very sensitive subject in general, but probably even more so on our field. And we still haven't nailed it, to be honest. We still want, because we prioritize deep interviews, because we are always trying to get build this comfort and these one-on-one relationships, we have to build trust from the beginning. And what that means is we try to store everything in a safe way. When we run surveys, we try to never collect IP addresses or any kind of identifying information ever, unless they willingly give it for future surveys. And whenever we have even the aggregated data, we try to put it in a space where it can't be stolen or hacked. But there's still room for improvement. When we think about designing for privacy, however, some of the things that you should consider are, do you actually need the IP addresses? Do you actually need first and last names? Do you actually need to, could you design your test in a way that is completely asynchronous, where people can just interact with it without having to identify themselves? How can you weave anonymity into your research process without sacrificing the quality of the research? And obviously this is an ongoing process, but I think that if you start thinking critically about what you actually need to make decisions versus what you just think would be cool to have, that I think that you can design user research tests and experiments that are meaningful without being invasive. And for taboo research, that's vital. So I realize I talk extremely fast, and I'm already at the end. So thank you for your time. I'd love to answer any questions you may have.
Hey, Lex, thanks so much. I really loved this talk, and I have a bunch of questions. There's also some questions. There's a fair amount of questions in the group too. So I think we should just get into some of them. And a few of the questions I see have been around wanting to know a little bit more about your interviewing process and what you're calling deep interviews. So would you mind kind of maybe defining what you see as a deep interview versus maybe a regular user interview in a way?
That's fair. For me, a deep interview it lasts anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours. And it's semi-structured. So you would have some questions that you've thought about in advance. You'd have your goals for each question already detailed and outlined. But then you would leave space for flow, right? And so it's, when you ask a question, you don't just keep going through your list, right? You listen, empathy, guys, listen and respond. So if something pops out, dig on it. Say, hey, well, you said that you felt really insecure when your boyfriend asked you for, oral sex. Why? Just keep showing that you're listening. However, for my process personally, I'm not afraid to use anecdotes of my own life, because you're asking people a lot. You're asking them to be super vulnerable with you, sometimes about trauma, sometimes about, real pain. And like I said, building trust is vital. And so I'm more forthcoming than maybe I should even be about any trauma I've encountered or anything that I've had happen to me similarly. The risk is that you anchor them in an answer. So that's why I said the bias thing earlier. However, I'd rather anchor them and make them feel safe than to leave them hanging, asking about something that's going to hurt them, because that's not cool.
Yeah. And And also I've been on the receiving end of one of these interviews, and I would say that you do a great job of it, and like do kind of include a safe space to kind of slowly ramp up in a way, and then kind of build some context first. And then at least the one time that like I was on the other side of this, and feeling that like by the time you got into more of these maybe more sensitive or risque questions, let's say, there was already kind of a rapport between the two of us in conversation.
Exactly. And that's
As
the most
well.
important thing, is like
Yeah.
building that rapport and building that trust. You know, and being sincere about it. Because like I really give a shit about what I'm talking about, right? Like it's not like I'm just doing this for shits and giggles. Like I really want to understand what's going on with people, to make them make the decisions that they make. And what are we not realizing, and what are we not serving them? You know, what do they need? Like actually need. I don't want another, you know, cute frilly lingerie thing. If they don't need another cute frilly lingerie thing, maybe they need something that's like a weighted blanket that they can wrap around their bodies, that tickles their back of their necks while they, you know, need to be held and they're lonely because they've been in their house for 5 months alone. You know what I mean? Like there are other needs that need to be met, and we need to find out what they are.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, I mean, so much. So one of the reasons I was really excited to like bring you on here too is, yeah, you do user research in depthly, not UX research necessarily, which is where a lot of our and product research, but where you're getting at is like, what is the need behind these people you're talking to is so aligned. And so many of the things you're talking about is like authentically getting at what specific use cases and scenarios and what this person's desires are in a really like really desires are, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think there was there's a question here of when you start the sorry, I'm just going to read it. So yeah, okay. So when you start it's again about this kind of interview process, like when you start the interviews, is there a particular question you ask to get an idea if they're sex positive or shy, so you can start kind of shaping the interview to question to be more direct or subtle? Like, are there some techniques or ideas or like things that you do to kind of gauge people in the beginning maybe, or is this something that maybe happens before you even set the interview?
That is a great question I'd never thought about. Um, Honestly, lots of failure.
Okay.
I have made mistakes often, but you can recover in the interview, so don't worry. Like you can always pick it up. Um, for me, I am lucky to have high EQ, and so I can usually sense when discomfort is happening. Um, yeah, you could. I don't know. I think it's a little bit trial and error. I try to start with like you know, kind of innocent life questions first, and then slip in things, you know, and then calibrate, you know. So like if you say, for example, if we're talking about something super sensitive and you use the word blowjob versus fellatio and you see how they react, then you can say, oh, I said blowjob, and they kind of, and then you might want to switch to fellatio or oral sex, and then you can kind of see where they are. Some techniques I've seen used are pre-screening questions, asking about backgrounds. So asking things like, you know, where'd you grow up? Are you religious? You know, trying to get things, and then you can can base it off that. But in a way, you're kind of stereotyping people. So I like to kind of be a little bit just hypersensitive in the beginning of the interview and calibrate versus like having a pre-screening question where I assume because you're a Christian that you're not sex positive. Well, that would be a mistake because I've had clients who are Christian and old and sex positive, and like, yeah.
Yeah. So like what assumptions do we bring as researchers or interviewers to the project itself as well?
Exactly. And so you have to kind of like not put yourself at risk of your own ideology ruining your interviews.
Yeah. I have so many questions and I'm reading all of them, but I think one of them that I do love, which maybe we can get there's a variety of directions I want to go in right now. One of them, though, the question we got is, could you talk a little bit about what Modality Group does and the projects that you've worked on, and how, I think you were talking a little bit about the process. I personally know more about it. So could you talk a little bit about, maybe to the larger group, of like, what does Modality Group do?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's a failure on my part in an introduction about your own company. Hey, yeah. So Modality Group is a sex tech intelligence firm. We are a startup, and so that means what we do changes as it needs to change. We started out as a consulting firm that did custom market research for sex toy companies. So I've worked on projects ranging from app-controlled strap-ons to we did a data analysis project for about retention for a women's sex company. We've done blowjob research. We've done research about sex education. A little bit of everything. We used to take a lot of projects that we probably shouldn't have, without any rhyme or reason. So yes, we were just consultants doing our thing. Now it's a little bit different. We are looking to still give advisory services, sure, but now we're looking to be more of a think tank, because I realized when I have to do research for other people for financial gain, it sometimes makes me angry. And so I feel like if we do things that we want to know about, and that are meaningful, we can do anything. And so now we're building up our capabilities so that we can research things like the impact of female genital mutilation on sexuality down the line in rural areas, or looking at things like the birth rate in Japan and its impact on economics. And so we're trying to get a little bit more broad, but also we're trying to get even more granular, understanding what the needs are for consumers. So eventually we will sell reports and data as needed, instead of just doing advisory services. So that's super vague. But, things are happening.
Yeah. For sure. I know some of the questions that are in the chat as well kind of touch on what you were doing previously a little bit more with these advisory and kind of consulting work with companies. And one of the questions, this two-part question, part of it's from me, but one of them is some of the difficulty might be of like the translation of this information to the stakeholders, to the clients that you're working with, like thinking about how do you kind of communicate that, and what kind of process that might be like, and maybe what have you found that are there some best ways of like, this is the information that you need to know from the research that you've done? I'll do that one first and then.
Yeah. The best way I found to relay information / translate it for clients is to always use a slide deck. Unfortunately, you want to tell the story in advance, make it very clear. And like, in a way, your data is where you get the story, but also it's how you support the story. So you can't rely purely on it. That's why the interviews help, right? You kind of start crafting the story as you talk to more people. And then the data kind of proves it, and you kind of just map it on. So telling a good story always helps, like being very clear and not overwhelming people. All of the detailed data sets and, your journey mapping, personas, all of that can go in your appendix if it's not directly relevant to the story you're telling. So that when they ask you a question, you're not a dummy and don't know it. You just scroll down. It's like, haha, surprise, I knew it was coming. Here's the information you have. But simple, like simpler the better. Tell the story, keep it clean, have the important information, but don't be a dummy. Have all of your deep stuff in the back.
Yeah. And does this a lot of times come through a time to actually present to people, I'm assuming, as well. So this isn't always a like, here's a report I'm giving you, or here's a slide deck. You're able to.
I never give just I never just send a deck over cold. I always have a meeting to walk through, because folks can do some things with your work. Like, you're gonna want to make sure you're not misinterpreted. But if you must send over a deck without like a meeting, record it. You know, there are so many tools like Loom, like pitch.com, where you can put your face in it and make it personal. It also just looks cooler. You know, it's like, oh, I really care about you. I'm walking you through my process, you know, and people get confused, you know. Yeah. So if, you know, I do think you should have a space for questions, but if you can't, you know, definitely personalize it with a video.
Yeah. We have the top rated question at the moment is, any advice for a researcher hoping to transition their career into this space, or a new researcher in general? Would love to hear about your path and learnings along the way.
Okay, so two-parter. Entering into this space, just start writing stuff. Literally do your research, have some sources, cite some people, put it out. This space is brand new, and you can really craft a niche. So if you have something you're passionate about, just do it. For a new researcher, read, read a lot. My journey was strange. So my background is I studied Chinese on undergrad, which has like no utility except for to speak Chinese. And then I ended up working in advertising. So I started doing research there. I was a grunt.
Okay.
And so they would basically make me look at all of the Mintel data, look at all of the analytics sheets, go through all the indexing, do all the competitor analysis, and just go through. So like I got trial by fire. So like I had a bit of a foundation before I started. So that was back in, I guess, 2011. And then I switched fields completely, blah, blah, blah. But when I came back into this space, I was in business school, and I had gotten a few more skills in data analytics, and like interviewing and doing like, you know, just different types of skills. And honestly, just making mistakes, going out into the world, trying it out with things that didn't matter really helped. And then as I started the company, I started just getting books. So I've read so many just like research methods things just to see what's out there and try to like build my own thing. And you can do that too, right? Just buy the book, read it. Like anything you think is stupid, leave. Anything you think is useful, take it. And then you start crafting your own research ideology. And then I think the next phase in my journey is I'll eventually do a PhD, just because I feel like I'm doing this work already. I kind of would love to have some credit for it. But that's a little bit, it's a vanity project, right? At that point. But I do think reading and just trying it out, trial and error, never hurt anybody.
Yeah. I think that also, if you are interested in getting into this field, I'm sure Lex would also be happy to connect with you afterwards. I know that she has some projects sometimes that she needs maybe some help with as well.
Oh, yeah,
Reach out to people who are in the
that.
field. I think would definitely be a great place.
I mean, if you want to be my junior, I will not stop you. I will take you.
Somebody I know who is very, very busy is this person right here. So back to this idea again, the next question I have was actually the second part of actually the question before, so I kind of mixed it up. But they said, like, do you record sessions? I imagine this can be uncomfortable for the participants, but my kind of interpretation was like, how do you handle like note taking and either recording or like documentation of these maybe deep interviews that you're doing with the sensitive subjects, with maybe sensitive populations? How do you think about that? And do you have any like ideas or suggestions of how people can kind of work in other sensitive areas with, or think about?
That's a fantastic question. Yeah, fantastic question. I don't record. I wish I could. That would be great, but I don't. I also don't type my notes while I'm in the interview. I think it's rude to hear the click clack while someone's trying to talk about, you know, their life. So I do handwritten notes, sometimes in a notebook, sometimes in a printed out version of the questionnaire. So I might take the questionnaire that I've written in advance and just print it out with big ass spaces, and then you can just do your thing. And then you can also add extra questions that you think of, which is cool, right? So you're talking, you listening, you write another question that came up to your mind as you were engaged in the conversation. And then this is the most important part. Then you have to transcribe immediately your notes.
Okay.
Do not wait. I have waited sometimes like 2 weeks to transcribe notes, and it was just like, I don't even remember what this note meant. Like, it's a wasted interview. So like literally 5 minutes right at the end after you finish, sit down, type up everything, type up your key learnings, type up your what could have gone wrong, any problems you saw. If you had tech difficult, it was just like a virtual thing. Any tech difficulties you had, write that, because that could have affected your answers. Like just like, if you have a Notion page, I think that works really well to kind of have it all in like a kind of a Notion grid. You can kind of keep track of it, or just a Google Sheet. But I don't care how you do it, figure out your system, write it down. So recap: handwritten notes, transcribe immediately, input anything that could go wrong or went right, or any gut feelings that you had that could affect the way people were answering.
Yeah. I'm curious, could you see a scenario where there is a third person who's taking during the interview, or in these kind of conversations around sensitive subjects? Like obviously the other person would be informed like on that, but could you see that being like, have you seen that ever happening? What are your thoughts on that as well?
I don't know. I think it depends on who we're talking to. Like for more businessy kinds of interviews, because I mean, we were building a B2B product for a while, right? And so sometimes we're just talking to founders. And in that case, it didn't really matter. They're used to talking about whatever they're talking about. And so I can have someone in the room to be there, and even to add questions in as they thought about it. So for those kind of low stakes things, it was fine. For something more taboo, I don't know. Like, I think in a situation in which a demographic was maybe had a different language that I didn't speak, if they came from a religion that I didn't know about, it might be helpful to have someone there to kind of guide the space. So like, I could think of maybe religious leaders or something like this could be cool, to open people up in a safe space, if they needed that. I don't know, it hasn't happened yet, but that's a great question. I think it could happen in those scenarios.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is take some vigorous notes on paper and then immediately try to get those thoughts out afterwards. Just kind of thinking about like some ideas of how do you be authentic and create a safe space for people, but also being able to document these conversations and the insights that you have at that.
Yeah, like I feel like it does have to be like that one-on-one if you're gonna do a deep interview. Otherwise, otherwise maybe try a focus group. I don't really believe in focus groups because they don't really work. And you get like these nuances or these personalities that kind of shift people. But like maybe it works for someone.
Well, thanks for telling us your experience on this and thinking about that. We have a question here that says, a lot of design research comes under fire for being extractive, especially with sexual minorities, gender queer people, etc., who are in vulnerable populations. Do you have any, how do you like do research ethically in these spaces? Do you have any thoughts about going deeper? I know you've touched on this a little bit, but thinking about that.
So the question is, how do I navigate
like ethically through vulnerable populations? Yeah.
Well, I mean, for the ones listed, I'm lucky. I happen to be Black, queer, and a little bit poor. So talking to people in the language is not really so hard in those spaces. Slash, I know that people exploit it. Like, I'm also from the States, like, yeah, troublesome. So personally, I haven't had the problem yet because of my identity, which is probably why I've gotten so far in the business so far. But I try to go through community leaders more often than not. When we first started, we went a lot through influencers. So it might be someone who is like a leader in the trans man community, and he's showing his top surgery. He's talking to people about what it's like to take T, navigating, the questions around bottom surgery, yada, yada. And I might reach out to them first and say, hey, like, here's what I'm trying to do. And basically explain that I'm not trying to exploit them for any reason. And then let that leader be the gateway to explaining. And then like it's up to me to keep the trust.
Yeah. And what I hear is coming within somebody, if you're not in that community, the ideal sometimes maybe is like you're within that community, it is your community. If you're not, then connecting with the leaders and people in that community, be able to find people to support you in this way.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thanks for that. And our last question we'll do is on a little bit of a lighter note. What are some sex tech products that you think are doing things right?
I am partial to the Satisfier. I was shocked whenever I got it. I got it for free at a sex show, and I was like, I actually don't like vibrators very much, at least historically. Ironic. And then I got the clit stimulator. I thought it was amazing, like because it doesn't touch it. It just kind of goes around and it sucks the air around you. I'm like, this is kind of awesome. Yeah, that one I would always recommend. There are a set of really interesting stainless steel kind of, they're not really dildos, they're more like just like things you would put inside and leave there, from this company called Enjoy, spelled NJOY. Really beautiful products if you're into that sort of thing. Tenga does really good products for penises. They're not the most sustainable products, but their ethos is great. I mean, the reason they're not sustainable is because they're disposable. So it makes cleanup for penis ejaculate really easy, which is like, I guess, convenient. And apparently the ribbing that they use on the fleshies, I can't think of the name right now, is really diverse. They have a whole lot of cool patterns that's set. And I just like the brand a lot. They're a Japanese company based out of Tokyo, and I love their founders and the people. Yeah, and then there's the Crave, which I want to try. I hear good things. Crave is basically a necklace with a little like nail looking thing, and it's like a bullet vibrator that looks like just a gold necklace. So it's like really kind of subversive, but I think would be really kind of fun, like, ooh, you don't know what I'm wearing. Yeah. I think those are the first four that pop off.
Awesome. Thanks for those suggestions and all of your insights into the work that you do and for sharing with us today. It was really wonderful. If people do want to connect with you or have further questions, because there was a ton of questions we could not get to today, is there a way that people can connect with you?
I'm always answering questions on LinkedIn, so feel free to add me or just send me a message.
I think Jeff just put it in the chat for everyone at the moment.
Perfect. So. Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna try to keep doing more articles and things regularly on LinkedIn. But you can also, I guess, email me at lex@modalitygroup.co.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing with us today. And yeah, I'm just happy. So thanks.
My pleasure.